Good afternoon, everybody. We'll be kicking off here in just a few minutes. Thank you for joining us.
All right, we'll go ahead and get started, everyone. Um, First off, I wanted to take a moment and thank everyone for taking time out of their day to join Luke and I. Got this lucky chance to be in person for this particular one. Today, what we're going to talk about, I skipped ahead already, is cybersecurity laws, AI policy, and incident disclosure. It's kind of what we see the evolution of what's going to occur in 2026. So without further ado, I'll pass it over to Luke to introduce himself.
Yeah, thank you, Corey. My name is Luke McComey. I am the Vice President of Offensive Security here at Red Helm. Teams that sit with me are really the offensive and the validation side of the house. So we've got pen testing, vulnerability management, and the CXO advisory type work as well. I appear with Corey, who's got the DefSec team, and I'll let him talk a little more about that.
Yep. Thank you, Luke. I'm Corey. Run the defensive side of the fence, like Luke said. So that's things like incident response, digital forensics, security engineering, monitoring stuff like SOC style services, managed detection response style services, and then an automation team. So that's pretty much what I run over here at Red Helm. So why is 2026 a big pivotal year in cybersecurity regulation? The big reason for that is there's a lot of changes coming down the pike. It, Not only that, but AI is now kind of a household thing. There's a lot of things that you really have to consider. What are you putting into the prompts? What data is in there? Is it customer data, like your customer's data? Is it your organizational proprietary data that's going into there? What's happening with that data? Are they training on that data? Is it becoming public? Can it be leaked? Can it be prompt engineered to extract that out, et cetera? So just in a general sense, 2026 is going to be a pivotal year for AI because there are going to be new regulations. There's going to be new exploits. There's going to be all kinds of new fun stuff that's going to come out in this direction.
Yeah, when we look at AI governance, it's interesting because there's a lot of different things we have to think about in application, right? And we'll go over some of these different things. We can look at the governance structure, AI policy foundation, risk classification, security privacy controls, legal compliance alignment, lifecycle management. I mean, we can go on and on, right? We have a lot of stuff here that we can kind of cover. I think one of the big things that we're going to kind of talk about today, though, is really the purpose of it and why it's valuable for you to have this type of thing in place. As Corey pointed out, AI has come quick, right? And the adoption rate has been absolutely insane. The problem with it is that we have had adoption quicker than we have had a chance to apply lessons learned, would I guess that'd be the nice way to say it.
Yes, 100%.
And even with companies that are trying to be on top of this, they're scrambling just to find resources and talent that can come in and help them just understand what it all is, what it means to a business, and how they potentially could lose, sensitive or critical information or data that is being put into these AIs. When we think about policy foundation and really creating the policy, it really comes back down to acceptable use, right? And yes, there is a trust that you have to have within your employees, but there are a lot of controls that you can put in place to try to regulate and kind of prevent some of the shadow AI stuff happening in the background.
Yeah, and so like right inside of that vein, a really good example of this is a few weeks back, Red Helm actually put out a notification about AI browsers. Like Perplexity has brought out their own browser that you can use that has AI natively built into it. Gemini is being built into Chrome, so on and so forth. Edge has Copilot. So AI is getting built into web browsers. And one of our stances was, well, you need to know which browser you're using, which AI you're using, what data is available to that. But whenever you start to look at the cybersecurity risk of that, what is the AI there to do inside of that browser? It's meant to make the employer, the user of that particular browser more efficient and more effective. How do they do that? Well, they fill out forms. Well, as a threat actor, what if you stand up a website, have a hidden form in there that, let's just say it fills out password information. Maybe it automatically fills out your address, whatever it is, like whatever your browser learns about you and becomes a repeatable process, you can have a hidden form behind that website that only AI will see whenever it scrapes it. And AI thinks it's doing its job by automatically filling those things out. So whenever we put out that notification, it was kind of our stance. Maybe you shouldn't be using AI browsers right now because you could be leaking data without even knowing it. You're not clicking on something, you're not doing something, but because the browser has all of that data inside of it, AI looks at that, looks at the hidden web form and says, hey, I'm going to make this more efficient, more effective. I'm going to fill this out so that you don't have to. Guess what? You just leaked whatever data that browser has. So, like Luke said, we're moving at a very rapid pace. And it's not that we shouldn't adopt things, but we need to be conscious about the security implications of them.
Yeah, I think the last thing we want to do is see somebody jumping onto a browser and see like something in the back end of, every Tuesday, my grandmother would send me your domain system password, right? Or something.
Yep.
All these prompt injection attacks that we're seeing people do nowadays. I think it's only the surface. Like Corey talked about, the new means and new methods of being able to exploit these systems are just starting to get looked at, right? When you look at the conversations and the detail that's really come out over the last couple of years at the big hacker and the security conferences, prompt injection has really been the big focus. But just like when SQL dropped or SQL injection dropped, I think you're only seeing the very tip of the iceberg.
We're absolutely only scratching the surface right now.
Yep.
So, like we were saying, AI has a really high adoption rate right now. It's a buzzword. Everybody's talking about it, right? We haven't figured out exactly how we should be using it. There's a lot of use cases to it, and everybody's trying to create a new use case for it and solve tons of issues. Solving issues is great, but again, kind of going back to that, there's this rapid adoption, there's this continuous improvement, continuous deployment methodology and approach and integration to everything, but there's almost no policies that are really being implemented. So like even just having a governance policy of we only use this AI, whether that's an internal, Copilot's private Copilot instance, ChatGPT, insert whatever AI, it's a private instance that my company owns, and that's the sanctioned AI. Something as simple as that, right? So then if somebody's stepping outside of that, then you can enforce, hey, we don't want our data leaking there. It's not private. It's going to be trained upon, that could be exposed later, and kind of going down into that side of the fence. That's kind of, a huge consideration as you go throughout this. So whenever we start talking about the more specific governances and regulations that are going to be coming down, one of the easy kind of ways, reviewing all of this, that your tactic really just needs to be, what is the solution that you're going to adopt organization wide? How are you going to secure that and review it and see what data is in there? And then how are you going to secure that data that the AI is using for, to train its models, et cetera? Securing that just like anything else. Like I know you said SQL, right?
Yeah.
Like a SQL database, you have all the data in one place now. How do I secure that data versus, SQL doesn't have a good reference point to what I'm about to say, but AI, if I just go to openai.com or chat.openai.com and I type in a prompt and I hit enter, whatever I've entered in there, I consider public knowledge at that point in time because it's going to be openly trained. There's been prompt engineering tricks that have exposed data of what people have put into the prompt. And so like putting customer data, proprietary data, ideas that you want to, do in, the future for your business, those now are all open domain in my opinion. And I feel like, whenever we start talking about these governance policies, that's kind of why they're geared the way that they're geared. You want to select what you're going to do. You want to figure out how you're going to control it. And then you want to make sure that the data that's flowing in there is the appropriate data. And then, like I said, if you step outside of that,
Yep.
you have some level of, recourse for that.
One of the other things too that's really important is to remember with any emerging technology, not just AI, is to try to get ahead of this, right? I think that, a good reminder would be like when cloud first dropped, everybody wanted to jump on the cloud, and there were all these people that really pumped the brakes and very quickly said, "Hey, listen, we understand, we can see the value of this, we can see where this is going, but we don't want to put our stuff out into a public cloud," right? And there were a lot of companies that were very hesitant to adopt. Well, the problem with that is what we ended up seeing when we go in and start working with customers is there's all this shadow IT instances and all these people, developers, open S3 buckets, protected source code that's from internal projects that are being developed. All this stuff ended up getting leaked and pushed out to a lot of these different platforms and locations because the tech folks thought and understood, how this stuff was being leveraged and used, but they could see the advantage of it. Problem was is that legal compliance, all of these folks didn't catch up quick enough. So now, several years later, we're still dealing with a lot of companies and businesses that are telling us that part of the largest problem that they have is that all of this information and data has been pushed out into these private cloud instances that they have no control over, that they can't see. When they have compromises of this data or information, they start wondering how or why this stuff got out there the way that it did. And it's difficult to go back to the employee who is just trying to leverage a new technology or a new method or a new approach to be able to make themselves more efficient, more valuable, those types of things. So when I look at AI and I look at the rapid adoption of AI that we've seen over the last couple of years, I don't think it's going to be any different. I think the legal and the compliance side of the house are just now starting to figure out that this is something that they have to be on top of. And unfortunately, we know that for 2 years, everybody's just been going out to Chat GPT, putting everything in there and not shutting off training, not shutting off sharing, all of these things in the back end that unless you've been trained how to use or you have some familiarity with the individual tools, you're not going to know to go shut this stuff off.
Correct. Yep, 100% correct. And then there's implications. So like if you think about regulations that exist already today, like GDPR, you start thinking about that. How are you erasing the data from your LLMs? How are you dealing with the data that your LLMs have been trained on or your AI components have been trained on? How are you removing that data? What's that going to do to your models? So there's like a whole even behind the scenes, not just governance, like how are you treating that data? How are you handling that data? And if somebody requests to be forgotten, how are you forgetting them? But what does that do to those models? Is it going to be retained in there? How do you go in and rip that out? Can it be ripped out? It might not be able to be ripped out. There might not be a function for that. So how does that make you, potentially vulnerable in the future to have potential either class action lawsuits, massive fines, kind of depending on the regulation and all of the things that go along with that. But there's a lot of implications that, whenever you start to look at this, how am I even going to do that? It might not even be possible.
Yeah, I think that one of the ones that we were talking about last night that's really interesting too is that we've seen companies that are fairly advanced. They're on top of the policy, they're on top of the procedures. They've got to find, Chat GPT or whatever it is that's being used in-house, right? Copilot, whatever. What they forgot is, what about all the vendors? What about all the third parties? What about all the contractors that they're working with? Is there something, and we'll go deeper into this here in a minute when we start talking about, third-party vendor relationships and the importance around this type of a thing. But you have to start building in AI governance and use type inclusions or exclusions into the agreements that you're creating with these different vendors and with these different providers.
Yep. One quick just house cleaning, if you don't mind. If you have any questions, please drop them into Q&A as we go throughout this. It's perfect timing, really, because it's time for our poll. Our poll question is, what best describes your current AI governance posture? Is it fully documented, partially, no policy, unsure to where to even begin? If you don't mind clicking on one of those, that would be really wonderful.
Do we get a vote?
No. Unfortunately, or fortunately, I don't know. Could be either. So we'll give everyone just a second here. And then, like I said, again, while we wait, if you have any questions, feel free to drop them in the Q&A section. All right, let's talk about FINRA. You want to take this one first?
Well, yeah, one of the big things that we're looking at here is both with FINRA and with the guidance that's come out from New York Department of Financial Services. The focus on this stuff is really making sure that you are thinking about how you're operating with third parties, right? And we did a webinar on this not too long ago. It's part of the reason that we kind of circled back on it is we had a lot of feedback from folks out there that were watching the webinar that a lot of the information we talked about was valuable and something they wanted us to get a little deeper into. New York Department of Financial Services sent out an industry letter, strong worded letter, but a letter nonetheless, not law, not regulation. This came out October 21st of this last year. And really what it does is it defines a bunch of guidance and expectations that are defined under what they call Part 500 that really help you manage cybersecurity risks related to third-party service providers. So you'll hear us say TPSP, right? We're not talking about tablespoon or teaspoon, even though every time I see the acronym, that's what I think of. It's really a third-party service provider, and that's how it gets referenced over and over again in this letter. There's a lot of stuff in there that are very helpful tips and hints. There's some good stuff that they talk about around, covered entities remaining fully accountable for, cybersecurity compliance. One of my favorite parts about this is that the industry figured out that a lot of these different companies out there are outsourcing the security, outsourcing the different services to an MSSP or some other type of third-party provider. And then when they get hacked or something goes wrong, they've been pointing the finger at the provider saying their job was to secure it. It's their problem. This new letter and the way that New York State is really pushing and looking at this stuff for all these different financial-based type businesses is that it's your responsibility. It doesn't matter if you're using a third-party provider. It is your responsibility. So you can't delegate that loss of that risk anymore. And I think that's going to be a huge change for a lot of people out there that have kind of just leaned into I'll hire somebody else and it's their issue, not mine.
Right. Absolutely. And the other part to this is whenever you start thinking about third parties, I would call it, maybe I'll make up something here and call it unconventional third parties, right? So I go out and I buy a ticketing system. I go out and I buy a software. I'm just going to call it a software as a service, financial services software, whatever it is. Everyone's building AI into their platform to make you more effective and more efficient, right? Well, part of this is going to be focused in on the third-party risk of that SaaS provider who now has AI overlaying all of your data that you've put into that platform for whatever reason, whether it's an EHR platform, whether it's it doesn't even matter. So like, and what Luke is saying is there's going to be an ownership on the organization, which means your due diligence of tool selection is going to change because of this. So like there's a lot of different angles and kind of lenses you could look at this from. But one of the ones that I felt like as I went through all of this that was kind of lacking that really wasn't talked about was the fact that onus is going to remain on the organization that even selects the third party. And that third party could be considered a software. That third party could be a SOC team that's monitoring. That could be a managed services partner. And they're using AI, but they might have a whole set of different tools that are each individually using AI, right? So that's why this becomes so important in having these defined third-party risk management structures. That's the piece and component as you're going down through these things. Like that's why it becomes so important. It becomes a situation as well where it's almost like eating the elephant.
Hmm.
Luke says this one all the time, you just got to start one bite at a time. But all of a sudden you think, oh, well, AI, I'm just outsourcing to this SOC, but the SOC could have 10 tools, and each of those tools have their own AI. Now it's not one AI, it's 10.
Yeah.
And now all of a sudden you've just bloomed from this like tiny little squishy, cuddly elephant, child's toy to an elephant that's, the size of an actual elephant. And then how do I manage that risk, et cetera? That may also play into your current providers, your current third parties. Are they doing the right things by you? And so actively and continuously checking in on those third party risk management things becomes foundational and fundamental to how you operate because of that.
Yeah. And, earlier I mentioned about the NYDFS letter being strongly worded. The reason I say that, and it's something we'll touch on a bit, is that they were good about how they approach this, right?
Yes.
One of the big frustrations that I'll talk about in FINRA is that there's a lot of shoulds, need to, ideal, right? When you read the stuff that came out in the industry letter from NYDFS, it's a lot of must.
Must. Yeah.
And one of the things that, like, we had an organization recently talk to us about how these new compliance-based type guidelines are changing their spend, changing their budget and their focus. A good example in here on one of the things that you can look at is that organizations must, going back to that strong language, organizations must maintain a risk-based third-party service provider management program aligned to the nature, scope, and criticality of the third-party relationship. Now, when most businesses read that, they go, well, I'll hire a third party to come up with that management program for me, not realizing that once again, they are responsible for the operation for the program. Can they go out and buy a tool to help them with this? Yes. Is it something that a third party is going to take on the ownership and the responsibility of? Nope, because this is an internal responsibility that your company is going to be assessed against. And you definitely don't want to end up in a situation where you're sitting there going, well, we're using a third party to validate our third party contracts and our third party relationships to make sure we don't have third party risk. That's not going to float.
Right. 100% not going to float. And then whenever you dig into some of the other ones, you have country, territory, jurisdiction, geopolitical. So you also have to take into consideration things like geopolitical, what's happening in the world politically. Is that inside of what we accept, et cetera? So like it goes beyond just AI. It goes beyond just, all those kind of things that we've touched on so far, and also steps into the realm of where is it at in the world? Do they have true trackable, traceable accounting? Do they have offshore accounts? Does this third party have offshore accounts? Are they doing things like that? So like there was a wide sweeping blanket that they're also slamming on top of this, not just kind of focused in one area. So it's really trying to align you to have a much more methodical approach to how you do diligence for third party risk because of that. Because if you, to Luke's point, hey, I hired company A, they're a shell company, they're a very obvious shell company, and they were doing all my things. Like all the risk is on them. They did the stuff, and we're scot free. Well, that's not going to work anymore because you're expected to do that due diligence, and you're also going to retain a lot of that risk, even if you are trying to work with a different entity. So it makes that type of a situation much harder.
Yeah, I think the other thing I'd call out on this before we kind of move into some of the FINRA stuff that's interesting in the way that they have pushed is the continuous or at least periodic assessment of the risk and updating that overall security posture. Over the last couple of years, we've seen it from insurance underwriters, we've seen it from governance, risking, and compliance type requirements and controls that are being modified and changed. If you see yourself as one of those companies where you feel like you're doing your due diligence by one and done a year, kind of putting this stuff in place, doing the initial assessment and then saying, yep, we've got it in place and it's good. Again, that's not going to float. Right now, really the big focus that we end up seeing in the way that these companies need to go about this is that they have to be looking at this stuff at least quarterly to be able to show that they've been doing their due diligence against assessing or protecting themselves against third-party risk and assessing what that potential risk and impact is going to be. Get into FINRA.
Yep.
You want to do that? Oh, yeah, that's right.
We'll
We've got
do
this
the
one.
full question. We'll dig into FINRA. So how mature is your third-party vendor risk management program? We'll give you a few moments to tackle that one here, if you don't mind. So while they're filling that out, we'll touch on FINRA, and then we can circle back to CIRCA.
Yeah, and on
Yeah.
FINRA, the key to note here is that this stuff is really setting forth regulations, separate from what we were talking about before, where it was a letter with suggestion. The FINRA stuff is literally going to be regulatory. Some of it already is, and really the big focus that they have there is that they want people to be able to establish and maintain a reasonably designed supervisory system, including establishing, maintaining, and enforcing written supervisory procedures for outsourcing activity. Blah 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 blah. The point is in this is when you go to read this stuff, you're going to need somebody that's on your team that kind of specializes in these different types of governance, risk, and compliance controls. Because if you go through and start reading all of the various FINRA rule stack, It's going to get boring. You're going to get lost really quick, and you're going to miss very, very important things. Um, the other thing to talk about too also is the SEC regulation S-P. This is really the Security Exchange Commission's rule that governs how financial institutions are dealing with people's like personally identifiable information or financial data and information. That is a large part of what gets referenced as well through this type of a thing. So again, whether or not you have to deal with the FINRA regulatory obligations, or whether it's something that you're just trying to pursue, make sure that you've got somebody in house or work with a provider, going back to that third party trusted provider again,
Yep.
who can really help you make sure that you're crossing the T's and dotting the I's. Cool example, when we kind of look at some of the different things that are there, with the FINRA notes, I get a little frustrated because again, now we're talking about a regulatory type situation and their language is softer. So there's a lot of shoulds, may, those types of things. If I was a customer and I had to deal with these different types of regulations, I would very much change those shoulds and mays to must, right? Because right now they may be a little flexible. I don't think it's going to remain that way. I think that this stuff is going to get really, really involved. Anything you want to add to that one?
No, you actually covered it really well, I think.
Cool.
So we can jump into what I call circa. It's not circa, and I'm probably annoying people by saying that. So CISA, CIRCIA, this regulation is implementing something that is very, very interesting, which is what you see up there. It's the escalate, communicate, detect, and report significant cyber incidents within 72 hours. So you also have to report ransomware payments made within 24 hours. These are two things that are, in my opinion, huge. Like this is brand new. Like there has been some reporting frameworks that have been put into place. There are inside of some compliances, depending on your vertical. Yeah, you might have a reporting cycle of 72 hours, but I think the one that sticks out to me, well, reporting is now going to be more generalized, but the one that sticks out to me the most is the reporting a ransomware payment made within 24 hours is.
Yeah, I mean, you were ranting about this morning.
Yes.
So a couple things. One, you should never pay the ransom.
Yes.
If you're having to pay the ransom, it means that you've done something else, right? Like you haven't properly prepared for an incident. You haven't done your incident planning. You don't have immutable backups that can be restored.
Yep.
Whatever the reason is that you get to a point where you've decided, supposedly within the 72-hour time frame or 24 hours of the time that you decide to make the payment, you've got to notify and let them know. So before, if you were a critical infrastructure entity operating within the US, all of this was voluntary.
Yes.
With the change that's now happened, this is mandatory. You must do it. This is not an optional type thing. And again, it blew my mind when I was reading through this because I was like, why are we telling people that it's okay to pay the ransom?
Yes.
And moreover, like to the point of calling it out on the amount of time that they have to tell us that they paid the ransom and done all these other things. And I started thinking heavier about this, and I realized that with critical infrastructure entities, a lot of the stuff that I was saying that you need to make sure you have in place is not something that this industry is up to snuff on yet, right?
Yep.
So if you were a power company, if you were a gas company, if you were transportation, if you are critical like internet infrastructure, any of these types of things, definitely make sure that you go out and look at these new requirements because they absolutely impact you and they are fairly strictly written.
Right. And also just, I got to highlight it because we've talked about it so many times as well, is reporting that you paid the ransomware. We have been in wishy-washy states about this where it was illegal and you could literally get in trouble for paying the ransom. So like, at the end of the day, now they're calling it out as part of this regulation that you have to report that you did that. Again, this is specific to
RICO Act violation.
RICO Act violation is what happens. Yeah, exactly.
Or like you're siphoning money or you're paying money to a threat actor, right?
Yes, absolutely. So at the end of the day, you're forced to essentially tell on yourself, and you don't know what that secondary regulations are going to be, whether you're going to then have recourse for reporting that. So this is going to be, that's why this one stuck out to me so much. Is such a high interest, because if you do what you're supposed to do and you report it, there's a possibility there could be recourse, and that can change over this year. And why, again, kind of why that's so important too this year is because we're still in a wishy-washy state with that one, in my opinion. Yep. There's not an official kind of stance. Yes, you will. No, you won't. So, whenever you make that, that's some fun territory. Back to what Luke said, though. We obviously recommend not to pay the ransom. The other thing I feel like it doesn't need to be said, but I'm going to say it anyways, is at the end of the day, we recommend not to pay, because every time you do pay, you're encouraging that threat actor to go do that thing again to somebody else. If nobody paid, there would be no incentive, right? At the end of the day, there just wouldn't be. The threat actors would move on to something else. They'd do some other form to figure out how they would get payments. So that's why our stance on this is so stiff, if you will, because at the end of the day, they're only doing it for money. If there's no money in it, they're not going to do it anymore. So
Also, a hard lesson learned that we've seen many clients have to struggle through. Don't communicate with the threat actor.
yep,
Don't sit there and try to negotiate with your bully, right?
yes,
And it's a big problem because they know it's just like the spam phone calls that you get to your cell phone all day. The moment you pick one up, it flags something in that database that says that you are a live, valid, real number with a real human on the other
yep,
side, and the calls just get amplified.
yep.
It's the same thing in these types of attacks. The moment that you're communicating and acknowledging with them that they have successfully stopped or shut down your business or have gotten a hold of, sensitive data or information that they shouldn't have,
Yep.
it's the same thing. They know you're a ripe target. They know that they've got your attention, and they now know that they can start pushing or
Correct.
upping their demands as well.
Absolutely correct. And they're going to do everything they can to get your money. Like I say that genuinely. Like, so even if you do, maybe you get put into a situation where, let's say there was data exfiltration, be very careful and thoughtful in how you approach that situation. Because like Luke said, if you reach out to that threat actor for verification of the data that they exfiltrated, they're never going to tell you that they didn't get all of your data. They're going to say, I got it all, right? Like every single time. You may not be able to prove without a reasonable amount of doubt with like what data was exfiltrated. And sometimes, yes, you may have to have that communication. You need to do it through the proper channels, whether that's through your cyber liability insurance firm, through their, your attorney, like that whole team that gets brought in during that situation. But only do that as an absolute, utter last resort. Like that should not be the first thing that you do, because like Luke said, I can't tell you how many incidents we've been a part of where all of a sudden, somebody's like, oh, I'm just going to see, what did you exfiltrate our data? And this is a literal situation that we went through. IT person sends right to the threat actor, hey, did you exfiltrate our data? And they were like, yes, we did. And here's proof. And they didn't send them proof. What they sent them was, additional executables to try and, compromise them. In that scenario, they were smart enough to know, hey, I'm not going to click on that. Then, nice try, guy. Ha ha ha. But what they did do is they were able to employ scare tactics. So that IT person realized they messed up. They should have talked to that person. By that time, it was too late. Their CEO's getting phone calls. Their CEO's calling them. Then their HR
Their
director's getting
CEO
phone calls.
family
Their
start
CEO's
getting,
family is getting phone
yeah.
calls. Like now all of a sudden the whole company's getting text messages, emails, phone calls, and it's relentless. Like once it starts, just to kind of give just a little bit of idea here, it doesn't stop for at least 2 weeks.
Yeah.
So you're going to go through the next 2 weeks. Your significant others are going to get phone calls. Your parents, your kids, everyone. It's just a blanket hit and hammer. And now everyone that was talked to is also now aware that you or your business has been compromised, right? So now all of a sudden there's this giant spread wildfire of awareness that this has happened. And so like all of these things start to happen. And then they're going to migrate to, the newer, last couple years here, they'll migrate to DDoSing your organization to try and bring them down in that way, right? So you're trying to get your infrastructure back up. Now they're DDoSing you. You don't talk to them. You don't reach out to them. A lot of the time, not every time, sometimes they employ those tactics no matter what, but a lot of the time they're just going to move on to the next target because that next target is probably easier than the people that are that are not interfacing with them.
One of the other examples we saw in this last year, going back to the third-party vendor risk, imagine being a services company or a software company or somebody that's selling this stuff out into clients. We've seen those companies get compromised. And the threat actors, instead of reaching out to the company that they compromised, they start spamming all the companies that you sell to or support, showing that you were a third party that lost sensitive or critical information about these companies. So that not only does it put you in a tough place in the fact that you can't access your systems, you can't access your data, they've now given you a bad reputation with your customers by being able to demonstrate that you created a loss or some kind of a security risk for their business.
Yep.
I think the last thing on this one really that I wanted to touch on at least too is, there's a lot of businesses out there that don't realize that they're a critical infrastructure company. Go
That's fair.
out to the CISA site. The government site has 16 different critical infrastructure sectors that have been well defined, and they explain and kind of step through, whether or not your business may or may not be something that is affected by these different rules or regulations. My point is that there's stuff in there that sometimes you just wouldn't think about.
Yes.
Everybody goes to power, everybody goes to oil, everybody goes to gas. But now there are things that they're looking at, like within transportation, where even individuals' cars,
Yep.
if you are working for a certain company and that car is smart enabled, there's little things like that that they start talking about in there. So it's important to pay attention to ways that you may or may not be affected, that I think otherwise people would just kind of have go right over the top of their head.
Absolutely. I 100% agree with that. That's a really good call out. So now we get to continuous compliance, right? So what you want to get away from is, both reactive fixes and as well as reactive fixes and continuously having somebody that goes out and audits and is pulling data manually and going app to app to app, grabbing each individual control, and then typing that in. And then you have this giant spreadsheet or whatever. Spreadsheets are fine or Word doc, but whenever you get to this space, there's a lot of pieces here that really need to be highlighted. But what you want to get away from is those reactive fixes and really start to shift towards, whether it's automation, whether it's whatever, but you really want to start shifting towards what is my risk going to look like across the next 12 months based upon regulations that are coming down, based upon the tool sets that we're using, based upon our third party risk, right? So you want to have these higher level initiatives that you're really talking about.
And one of the things back to what Corey was saying about the complexity of this, don't try to do this out of a spreadsheet. I'll push even harder on this,
Yeah.
right? Like those days are gone, right? This stuff is complex. It's living. It's something that, since it has to be continuous or at least periodic, you're going to constantly be updating it. It needs to be something that has high visibility, good scorecarding, a good understanding of where you're weak, where you're strong. There are a lot of good services and tools out there. We're pretty vendor agnostic, but in the past we've recommended and leveraged to companies like Aptiga. We use Synomi currently. These are software platforms that you can put in place where you can cross map your various controls that exist into a single platform, to where you have one source of truth, one source of evidence, one source of your gaps, your dashboarding, everything else living in one place, and it makes life a lot easier. We also find, a little bit of a side tangent, but we find that by moving to these types of softwares where you can do the combination of the various overlapped controls, it'll also help with audit fatigue, right? Because instead of you having to go, okay, this quarter we're doing SOC, and we got to do SOC 2 type 2, and we've got to get to this point. Okay, next quarter we're going to focus on GDPR requirements, right? The third quarter, we're going to come back in and it's got to be PCI. Fourth quarter is going to come back. And as you can see, it's quarter after quarter after quarter. And anyone who's ever worked in this industry, the questions you're being asked, the controls that are in place, almost all of them are rinse, wash, repeat between these different compliance requirements, right? They'll have unique little things or different controls that maybe aren't seen in one or the other. But a majority of the body of the things that you're responsible for, the things you're being asked, the things that you're trying to establish and determine your maturity in, a lot of those controls are going to be shared. By moving to one of these types of platforms, and being able to do that cross-mapping overlay and working with somebody like a CXO advisor, that's someone that can help you steer this situation to where you measure once and you report many. It'll save you so much time and effort overall.
Yeah, absolutely. And in that same vein of audit fatigue and things of that nature, I've seen in the past, like, I'm going to say shambles is an extreme of what I'm about to say, but to Luke's point, kind of on the reverse side, whenever you have these regulations, you have this giant bucket set of these questions that are very similar, kind of fall into this category right here where I'm rinse, washing, and repeating all of these quarter, 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 quarter. But then you have your outliers, and your outliers, whenever I was talking about why I said shambles, is what ends up happening is you're really auditing them once a year, right?
Yeah.
And those outliers, what happens is next year during that next SOC 2 type 2, let's say, your outliers that are specific to SOC 2 type 2, they're in shambles.
Yep.
Where are those controls at? You're scrambling. And so what happens is you have a group or a team that is consistently scrambling quarter to quarter to quarter to quarter, because every quarter they're now all of a sudden looking at the outliers saying, oh crap, I haven't looked at those since last year,
Yep.
right? Now the bulk majority, that big piece, that big chunk that's rinse, wash, repeat, they're probably going to get really well. That's going to get tight, and it's going to get tighter over time. But what I've seen time and time again is that you have that great kind of foundation, which is awesome. That's great. And I recommend that you do that. But you also have to think about your outliers, and you really shouldn't be testing some of those controls. Some of them are fine for like once a year, but you should really, to Luke's point, you should be checking in on them more than once a year, because like a silly one, which is part of many, it's a bad example of what I'm about to say, but it's easy to understand, is user access. Well, if I only check user access once a year, if I only audit that once a year, it's too late.
Yeah.
Because I could have, like, I do my audit in February. Okay, let's say my audit ends in February, and I don't check it again until next December, because it's usually a quarter end, a quarter to quarter basis for your checks. If I don't check it again until December, well, there's a whole time lapse there that I don't know what's happening. And by the time I'm reporting, I don't even have the visibility to capture whether we did, like, okay, we did something wrong once I find out in December. But if you're checking in a more consistent basis that is more continuous, you have a chance to capture that as a miss and then right the ship, so to speak, before it becomes a miss for your audit, right?
Yep.
Because by the time you're checking in December, it's too late. It's going to be a red X on that particular one, so to speak.
Yep. I always tell people, move your gap program inside. Even if you're using a third-party assessor or a third-party provider, to come in and partner with you to help drive this or provide software or, guidance and advisory, make this something that is part of your internal process. It should be something that's living. To Corey's point, I used to do a lot of gap assessments in a previous life, previous job. And one of the most frustrating things for me would be to go into a business, to spend a month and a half with them, to go through all these controls, to check all the evidence, to look at everything that's in place, and then provide them a report of ways that they needed to improve, right? And for those of you who have been through this stuff before, it's kind of like a stop sign type approach, right? It's usually, there are no controls in place. It's a complete gap. You've absolutely got to address this. there's some remediation, and then there's compliant. And the crazy part about it is that we would do all this work, spend all this money, all this time, hand them the report. And then to Corey's point, 365 days later, we'd be back in there on another month and a half long engagement, starting from ground zero,
Yep.
doing all the same work
Yep.
again, repeating every single thing. And 90% of the time, we wouldn't see changes or improvements in their
Yep.
overall security posture because there's nothing inside the organization that's driving advancement and making sure that these different remediations go get applied within the business and that they're actually functional and making them more secure, reducing the impact of being attacked, right? By having a continuous program. And again, work with a third-party trusted provider, somebody who can help you steer this stuff. But by having that program that's a living program and an ongoing program, it makes it to where you continually are able to hold your internal divisions, your employees, the partnerships you have with third-party assessors, whatever it is, you're able to hold them accountable because you have this regular check-in that's going on. And that provider or that partner or those internal businesses are going to go, man, I've got to take care of this in 30 days because I know in 30 days we're going to go back through and look at the progress that we've made on these individual controls and update our dashboard.
100% correct. 100% correct. Did you have anything else? I jumped ahead a little bit, but
No, it's all good, man. We're pretty good there. I think that we kind of called this stuff out. Compliance scorecards, definitely a big tool. They help. Vendor risk frameworks, we've talked a lot about that.
yep.
IR playbooks and tabletop testing exercises. I'm a little picky on these ones. I tell you, I watched for years and years. I watched people pay a lot of money to do incident response tabletops and get nothing out of them.
Yes.
And I'm not trying to be rude, but when somebody comes in with a static PowerPoint that they've given to 500 other companies and asks you questions so that they can check a box that, yep, you've thought about this or no, you haven't, it really doesn't test your actual incident response capabilities, right? It just makes sure that you have some structure in place.
Well, so let's pause on that one if you don't mind. Like talking about compliance in general, I feel like the industry treats compliance as how can I get the checkmark box,
Yeah.
not necessarily understanding you say this all the time. This is the minimum viable thing that you are legally accountable for. This isn't secure. This is compliance. This is saying this is the minimum thing that you have to do that we will see and agree that you are compliant. That doesn't equal security, right?
No.
Or secure. So kind of back to
No,
your point.
yeah. I always love telling people when I go sit in a boardroom, it's like, why would you ever set out to do the legally minimum viable solution as your goal?
And I'm just achieving a check mark in it. Like not even saying that I do that entirely. I got the check mark. I was compliant in this particular section.
Yep. So the point is going back to your IR tabletops and your playbooks, make sure that you're working with a provider or developing an internal program that's something that's actually going to be valid and applicable, right? We made a fun way to do it. If you come to Red Helm and you do tabletop incident response testing with us, we play it like a tabletop game. One of our consultants came up with this method several years ago. You literally are rolling a D20 die. The D20 die helps determine whether or not the actions or the methods of what you were doing to remediate or take the next steps within the incident, if those are going to be successful or not, right? You roll a 1, you failed miserably. Your opportunity to go eradicate or isolate these individual systems that are spreading a virus within your network completely failed, right? You didn't get there in time, whatever it is. You roll a 20, good job. It made it to where you were able to isolate and shut down that incident. What are your next steps? The whole point of playing it the way that we play it like this is that because of the die roll, you're never ever going to go through an incident planning or an instant test in the same way, right? These different tabletop tests will always be unique. And I think that it's important that whoever you end up working with from a provider standpoint, or whether or not you develop one of these programs inside, it's something where you think about the reality of going through an incident, because just sitting down, putting people around a conference room table and reading through a piece of paper that nobody's paying attention to so that you can check a box is not putting you in a better security posture.
100% agree. And living the IR life at the end of the day, like to Luke's point about the D20 die, it's random. I think two things there. One key component is, if I'm hearing you correctly, I would want to regurgitate it. For IR tabletop exercises, you always want to have a changing IR tabletop exercise. If somebody's coming in year to year and it's the same one, hey, malware broke out. What are we doing next? Right? Like if that's how it goes, that's probably you're not getting value from that. The second thing I wanted to say there is really in that randomization thing. While you have the best DRBC plan in the entire world, disaster recovery and business continuity plan, there's a possibility it could get popped. It could be lost, or it could be unavailable when you need it, right? And those are different things. To be very specific, like it could be unavailable. Your provider could be down who has those backups and you need them. What are you going to do? So I bring that up because you always want to go through these things and have some component of randomization to them, because we've been in a situation. Quick side story here. We had a customer who was compromised. They weren't. I should rephrase that. They weren't a customer. They did call us. They got cyber insurance firm involved, and then they said, you know what, we're going to go with this company instead. Which that's fine. That's fine. So they were fully encrypted. The good news was is they had backups, so they restored from those backups. However, the cybersecurity team that was brought in dropped the tool, contained I don't want to say they didn't eradicate, but the threat remained, is what I'll say. And then about 3 weeks go by, and all of a sudden the company is end-to-end encrypted again. But this time, the threat actors figured out how they were able to get around the fact that they encrypted their backups. Well, they figured it out. And what they did is they went and deleted all of their SAN snapshots so that they couldn't fall back to their SAN snapshots. So now all of a sudden, the thing that they used the last time, they don't have now, right? So just to that point, like in that scenario, this organization was compromised, encrypted. They were like, hey, you know what? We don't have to pay the ransom. Awesome. Restore. And then the threat actor remained in there. And then the next thing you know, everything's encrypted again, and all of their backups are actually gone. So, like in these scenarios, you have to keep that in mind. And that's the randomization component. Like, what happens if the worst possible scenario plays out? I've walked into
You actually just hit the nail on the head. I'm sorry to
no,
interrupt,
go
but
ahead, go ahead.
that's actually a key point. The other thing that we see people make a lot of mistakes about is when they think about an incident response tabletop test, they only focus on somebody phished me,
Yes.
somebody hacked me.
Yes.
Like Corey just said, you need to think about the worst case scenario that could possibly exist. We have one customer who does 4 incident response tabletops with us a year. One is technology based, where it's, somebody came in and hacked us. These are the things that they could potentially do. They're trying to exfiltrate sensitive data. They're trying to crypto lock our computers and our employees. But the cool thing that we also watched this same company do is they said, we're going to look at other things. What happens if the city we're in gets hit by a nuke, right?
Yep.
There's all kinds of geopolitical heat happening right now.
Yep.
What if we get nuked, right? What does that look like? And a lot of people out there will probably giggle when they first hear that, but it's a real thing to think about, right?
Yes.
The other example that they did that I thought was awesome was that pre-pandemic, they had already been thinking about the fact, what do we do and how do we continue to operate if a global pandemic happens? The
Yep.
funny thing was is that when they did the incident response initially, there were a lot of people that were kind of like, when was the last time a global pandemic happened?
Right.
Then when we got hit by one, this company was actually fairly well prepared because they were like, we'd already thought about remote work.
Yep.
We'd already thought about having to shut down the offices. We already thought about how we were going to engage our customers and continue to manage our teams. So when you're doing these different types of IR tabletops, remember, it's not just about your computer getting hacked.
Absolutely agree. And one story that I was going to bring up so that you same page was, I remember walking in this early days in my career. I walked into a server room. Well, I should say less server room, more basement. It was dark, and all the way down there, and I know nobody can see where I'm pointing, but it was literally just a kind of like a hallway. It was dark, and then you see lights, and that was their servers. And I'm walking, and I hear this splashing noise as I'm walking. It's because the floor was completely covered in water. And a server rack that I'm looking at, I start to realize there's an APC unit, a backup, like battery backup, that's literally covered in water. And I'm walking in the water. And so like not just thinking about, okay, is my server room safe, but what if there is a flood? What if there's a fire? So it doesn't always have to be, what if we're nuked? What if it could, and what's interesting about that is if you look at any of these scenarios, if we're nuked, that's a bit of extreme. Like
Very
depending on,
extreme.
like if I have 7 offices, like that's, but what if there's a fire, right, at my main location where my data center is?
Yep.
Well, what are you doing for backup? Do you have recoverables? Like, how are you going to operate? All those questions. An IR tabletop is a great place to play some of those options out, right?
Yep.
So if I have a fire, if a nuke goes off, do I have an East and a West Coast location? Do I have these types of things? Do we have backup internet? Even like that question has probably been brought up quite a few times during IR tabletops. It's like, well, yes, we have 2 different internets connections, but they're on the same pole that I'm looking at right now, and a car hit it. And the way we found out was because they both terminated the same spot. So things of that nature. Those are great places to play out just even more, I'll say generally, disaster style scenarios too.
That's great.
All right. So we'll go to our next poll question. What's the next big thing on your IT security roadmap? And this is a type in question, so it's totally up to you. You can put in whatever chaos you want there.
Also, as you're wrapping up with this, please make sure that you put any questions that you have into the Q&A. We'll get to those next.
Yeah. Give everybody a minute here. All right. Well, while folks are doing that, let's check out the Q&A. Do you have any templates or suggestions on how to find or ensure what partners' AI policies are so you aren't compromising our data? I would say, do we have templates?
Not formal.
Not formal, yeah, but we do have thoughts, suggestions. Our vCISO service, and I'm not promoting that, I'm just saying they deal with that quite often, actually. I know we've written a lot of documents, so there may be something a little bit more reusable, but I wouldn't say that we have like a formal one that we can hand out at this point in time. One other thing, and then I want to get Luke's thought on this question, is keep in mind with AI, it is, and this is a great question, by the way, the heart of it is very good, and I we should have something to give you. But also keep in mind that everything is changing so rapidly that a lot of the things we actually did do this. And by the time we were like, all right, let's give this to people, it was like,
Yeah.
let's start over.
Several sections
Right.
of it weren't good enough anymore. But the key is really when you go out to do this, I think that one of the things that will help you is really sit down and think about your relationships, think about your business, think about the providers that you leverage, the people that you let into your building, all of the standard stuff that you look at from like a third party assessment. Or one of the governance risk and compliance type requirements that exists around like acceptable use. These are all great places to start to look at ways on how to structure and to start building out your policies based upon the different tools that you have, based upon your level of adoption. All of those things are going to modify and change those policies and the way that they're written or the way that you apply them to your business. But go out and look at some of the basic templates. I think one of the best AI policies we've seen created recently, literally the structure that they used, I think was a SANS. It was a SANS acceptable use policy that they modified for AI.
Correct.
And it just gave them the basic structure they needed to save them a bunch of time.
Yep. Go to the next one. Many firms use third-party general Gen AI tools where the underlying model is a black box. How can a firm satisfy its due diligence and oversight obligations under regulatory notice 21 through 29 when the vendor may not disclose the full training data or model architecture? So this is a really big gray area right now. And my security practitioner mind in answer to that question is simply don't use it. Unfortunately right now, right? It's the best answer, and I'm actually going to get into a little bit of the next question that's coming for my answer as well, is if you can't control the data, there's not much you can really do. So private instances, private LLMs, privately trained LLMs that you can control, that's the only way that you can do that. And then if your partners are doing that, the people that you're working with, your third parties, if they're doing that, then they should be able to give you that oversight and answer those questions or satisfy that to the best of your degree. And then it becomes really more of a trust conversation. Do I trust that vendor enough with that data and how they're telling me they're going to handle it versus, well, how many times have we seen prompt engineering attacks that have leaked ChatGPT data or Claude data? Literally, the individual name doesn't matter. It's happening with all of them.
Yeah, I think the other thing too here is that if you go and you read the rule on this stuff, a lot of it falls onto due diligence. Yeah. And in one of these types of situations, if you've asked the vendor the question, if you've provided the form for them to fill out, if they've provided the detail and they're not being, they're not disclosing, as you point out in the way that you phrased your question, I hate to try to go to the pass the buck thing because again, you are responsible, but you've done your due diligence. You've done something to try to pursue and to try to understand how this data is being, leveraged or used. Is it being trained in a common model with shared tenancy where everybody's data is in the same LLM, right? And those are the types of questions that you need to go ask and really try to determine, are they doing the right thing in the way that they're applying these new tools, this new technology, and are they thinking about security, right? It doesn't have to be perfect. It has to be good. When you look at the way they worded this, like I said, a lot of it really comes down to making sure that you have done your due diligence. They don't really define what that due diligence is, but you want to be able to hang your hat on something that says, look, we put in the effort, we put in the time, we thought about this, we did the best we possibly could. Did that vendor do something that was bad and messed up? Sure. But if you've taken the opportunity and the time to say, hey, we've at least, crossed these T's, checked these boxes, dotted these I's, done all those types of things, it's going to make it really difficult for the government to come after you to say, your lack of security, your lack of vetting a third party vendor, your lack of whatever. Those things aren't necessarily going to be things that'll come down as hard on you as long as you can show that you've got a process in place and you've done the basics and have at least put in the time and the effort to try to do the best you can.
Absolutely. So we're going to go just a minute over here. We have one other question that I wanted to answer, which is what's the best way to monitor and log AI decision making for incident response or forensic analysis? I'm going to take this step back first, and then we'll dig into the official question. But kind of back to what I said earlier, just logging it in general, we want to make sure that it's private instance, that you have full unfeathered access to it. Those are probably going to be the fundamental and foundational steps. But if you look at the industry, I'm going to call out CrowdStrike on this one in particular. They just made two massive acquisitions in the last few weeks. One of those was Seraphic. Seraphic is a browser-based security company that is now being acquired by CrowdStrike. And the reason why, if you look at the memo from the CEO of CrowdStrike, is they want to get into the browser business because if your user base is doing what they're supposed to be doing and you're using a private instance of Copilot or what have you, you're going to a location that your company controls in prompting and doing your thing, or using it to, in all the various ways that it's integrated, versus your user base always has the option to open their browser and type in chat.openai.com or claude.ai or so on and so forth, whatever their AI choice is. And so that's why we're going to start to see a refresh around that as well. But to answer this question a little bit more specifically, with the tools and capabilities that exist today in the industry, your best shot at this is going to be DLP, data loss protection tools, law, like you're classifying your data, classifying who has access, who's allowed to have access, when they're having access to it, how they're accessing it, and then digging into where they're putting that data whenever they touch it, move it, or copy it, etc. That's really going to be the only tool kind of in our feather cap that we have today that you can really deal with that. It is not a perfect system. It does not cover AI in total general. As more specifically though to the AI decision making, I'm actually going to let Luke talk about this one because we talked about it at dinner last night. I would call this bleeding edge research though, is what it would be, not necessarily something that exists today.
Yeah, the challenge is going right back to the way the previous question called out the fact that a lot of this operates in a black box, right? And I think that one of the big things to look at is that if you are going to adopt AI into your business, as Corey pointed out, you should manage it.
Yes.
You should own it. It should be a tool just like any other tool, right? Even if you're putting it out on the cloud, like you do your Salesforce, like you do your Okta, like you do, whatever it is, right? These types of things, you can implement and put them out there in a way that's going to be meaningful and valuable and still somewhat secure, right? I think the biggest problem that people have right now is that they're doing these open adoptions of these public models and thinking that that's going to be an acceptable way for their company to proceed. And to the point of your question, how am I ever going to go out and ask ChatGPT what my employees have asked it, right? If I don't have a enterprise account, if I'm not regulating and monitoring that and overseeing that, looking at what prompts have been sent, looking at how it's responded, it's going to be a black hole. So I think the big thing here again is try to regulate, find the solutions and the tools that work best for you. Don't necessarily, we've seen some companies that'll be like, I'm just every time I see a new AI, I'm just going to add it to the blacklist so that nobody can visit it on their web browsers. Well, that's never going to work. It's so prolific now. There's no way that you're going to be able to just block it by blocking URLs. You need to take a more realistic kind of approach and set an appropriate expectation, policy, and procedure around how this stuff is going to be used right.
Absolutely. And that was an excellent way to wrap it up, Luke. Thank you. So I just want to say thank you for everyone today for joining our webinar from the helm. As we wrap up this session, please don't forget to register for our next webinar. It's going to be February 19th, and it's going to have Luke here. It's going to be Luke talking about some cool stuff again. So again, thank you for your time. Hope you guys have a great day.